Hi, welcome to 20 Ideas for Pincushions. We're having a whole lot of fun this year doing lots of different programs. A lot of them have 20, pretty much all of them have 20 parts because it's 2020. So we're doing 20 different pincushion ideas, as I've just said. And so this time we're doing them one a day for 20 days, and there's patterns available through GourmetQuilter.com. If you have signed up to receive the pattern, you will have something that looks a whole lot like this time to download and print with shapes if they're required, and all the cutting information and things like that for each pincushion. So today we're doing pincushion number 10, so we're halfway through today. Quite exciting, we've been having a lot of fun, and today we're just making a very, very cute little friend. We're making a little toad. Now, some people may think he's a frog, but they would be wrong. He lives here with me at Toad Hall. My house is called Toad Hall. So today we're doing this very cute little toad. He loves to sit around. He loves to just lay down. He loves to even sit on your shoulder. He can sit on your sewing machine. He can just sit there and have a little chat with you. So in order to make him, I'm using something like, I am using the crushed walnut shell filling so that he's got the mobility. He also works really well as a little beanbag toy, I must say. I've made these frogs for years, and we've had many a frog careering around our house. So the crushed walnut shell works really well as a filler because it makes him quite movable, like a beanbag type thing. And so because of that, I didn't want to use batting this time. Sometimes I use a light batting as a liner so that helps make a softness for the overall look of the pincushion. Because of his little tiny pieces on his feet and things, the batting wasn't an option. So what I've decided works really well is to just use double fabric. So I'm using a lining one and then my outside fabric. So I'm cutting everything together. So what I thought I'd show you was just how I've gone about that. So on the pattern page here, there's a shape to trace. And so if you have a light box or light source of some sort, it may just be your window, you can trace the shape onto the fabric. I suggest you use something inside. It doesn't have to be plain, of course, but you need to be able to see what you're tracing. So for the underside of the toad, he's just one piece. And then on the upside, there's two pieces. So on the pattern, there's a line, and we're going to put the fold on that line for the underpiece so that we can trace it and then cut it on the fold. So really all it is just a matter of tracing the design, and I have already done it, but I'll just show you how I went about it. So I just placed my fold line on that line, and then I've got a pencil and I've just traced straight onto the fabric the cutting line. So that's the outside solid line, not the dashed stitching line. So I've already traced it on to the fabric, and I've done the top as well. So the top has the join, so it's got more of a shape going on along the top edge there, so that we can have him sitting with a nice sort of raised back. And so I've done all that, and I'm placing that on a fold. And I'm going to place that with my fabric that I'm making the underside out of. So I'm having a red frog toad this time, and underneath he's got this sort of soft, whatever this colour is, a sort of buttery something colour. It's a very nice colour. So I'm going to be cutting those out manually. So what I've drawn is the cutting line, and it really is easier to cut everything out and then we start sewing it together. So possibly a little tedious, but that's how we have to make toads. So I'm just going to cut everything out now through all my layers at once with some scissors, and I just have to cut around that line because then I'm going to be stitching with my 1/4 inch seam line along those edges. So I thought I'd just show you how I went about doing this, and now I'll go ahead and I'll cut out my two shapes. I've got the top one on here ready to go, and then I'll show you how we start sewing him together. So I've cut out all the pieces. I've got my underside here with its lining piece, and I've got my two top sides here with their lining. So what I'm doing is putting the lining with the outside piece, so we're treating it as one fabric. So I found the best way to do that is probably to lay them together and then just iron them. It doesn't fuse them or anything, but they kind of sit together quite nicely. So now what we need to do is we need to do the seam that goes along his back here to make that into one segment. So we just need to, so I've just marked where that fold line was on the pattern so that we know where to sew to, because that's where the other piece is going to come up to. So we just need to stitch around that top shape now, just from that point to that point, just using our regular 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then we can open that out and we can join him up to his belly. So I'll just go ahead and I'll stitch this seam. So we just want to start with a little back stitch and finish with a little back stitch at each end of the seam. So when we stitch something like this, because we're not having anything that sort of fills in the seams and we've got a granular thing going inside, I'm suggesting just making your stitch length just a little bit shorter than for regular sewing. So this machine normally is on 2.5, I've taken it down to about 2. Other than that, we're doing a little back stitch at the start and we're going to stitch around this curve fairly carefully here so that we get a nice smooth seam. If we need to stop and start occasionally or stop and swivel, that's fine, and I think I will, because it just goes in more smoothly if we do. And just around this tighter curve we might need to open it up a little bit, and then we're just going to come to here and then we're going to do a little back stitch and we can take it out. So what we've got now is that nice sort of curved top of his head and round his back. So you can see that that's already looking pretty good. And so now we can join him to his underside. So we're going to open him out. So remember we're treating these two fabrics as if they were one. And the same with this one here. If you needed to put a couple of pins in just to hold them together, that's fine, just so long as you don't let them attack you. So, and now I'm just going to pin this piece in just at a couple of points at least, just to make sure that it doesn't move. So right at the front here where we've got that, where we started sewing, I'm going to pop a pin in there, right at the front of his body on the underside there. So we've got the right sides together doing all this. We are going to be leaving a gap for turning and filling, and we're going to do that right at his rear end down here. So we can start pinning these pieces here together so that we can go around his feet. So everything should fit because we've cut everything from the same pattern piece, and rather than pin all around the edges, I find that a pin somewhere in there to hold it till I get to that stage is a good idea. And we can go all the way round doing this. So I'll go ahead and just put my pins in and I'll start sewing, and I'll be following my line all the way around 1/4 of an inch in. So I'll show you when I get to that stage. So I've gone ahead and I've just put a few pins in to hold him everywhere. He's sitting quite well, everything's fitting nicely. We're going to be leaving this little back end open for turning at the front end here. So we're just treating everything as if it's one shape. So even though we've actually got 4 layers there, just keep an eye on those edges, and I think it's going to be easier to sew him with this side up rather than underneath, and it might get caught and bunched and things like that. So I think I'll just go ahead and start sewing. I'm going to start here and I'm just going to go all the way around. So I'll just get started. So just fairly close to where his legs start coming out is a good place, and we will need to stop and pivot on some of these corners. They're fairly tight, some of these shapes, but just take our time. So just make sure your edges are staying together. So some of these little feet are quite tight, these little curves. So stop and start more often rather than trying to just dragging it around. It will work better if you do it every couple of stitches if need be. And really it's just a matter of taking your time and going all the way around like this. So I'll continue on now, you know what I'm doing, until I get to the other end so I can show you how we make him up. So I've done all the stitching around, and just make sure on the other side that everything's looking okay, that nothing's moved while you weren't watching, because sometimes toads do that. So I think what we need to do now is really just trim this seam allowance a little bit smaller, because there's so many curves. We will also have to clip into some of the curves. So in particular around these little toes of his here, I'm just suggesting we just trim it down a little bit less than it is at the moment, because we don't want too much bulk in there. And as well as that, in these tight curves here, because on here we want them to open out a little bit, we need to just make that possible. So in these little tight curves, we need to do some extra little clips. Now don't clip to your stitching, just clip nearby. But so that when that's turned out the right way, it can open out like that, and everything will sit so much smoother. So I think we just need to trim all round carefully. Don't trim the area where we're going to be hand sewing it closed, because we'll need that extra amount to turn that in there. Otherwise, I think he's looking pretty good. He just needs trimming and clipping, and then we can turn him out the right way. So I'll go ahead and trim and clip mine, and we'll do the next bit. So I've gone ahead, I've trimmed all my seams, I've clipped all my little curves, particularly any of the tighter little curves, but all curves, because they've got to sort of make sure that they can sit out the other way. So he's all ready to turn and fill now. So the turning is a little, possibly a little time consuming, because you've got to push all his little toes out. So he just comes out through this little gap that we left there. And he does come. But he's not too sure about his legs. They're a little bit slow to come, it seems. So it just requires just a little bit of encouragement to bring all the other parts through. So I think it's entirely possible. I know it's entirely possible. It just takes a little bit of time to push all these shapes out. So I definitely suggest some sort of a tool that will help you push things, and maybe even pull things occasionally, because all these little toes and things all have to be pushed out individually, because the fabric is not especially wanting to just release everything. It just likes to hang in there. So I'll go ahead and keep pushing. It really is just a matter of encouraging gently all the little bits and pieces, because I think we're doing quite well. We've got a little thigh going on here, but now we need some toes. And they're in here somewhere, those toes. So I've been busy turning him out. He needs a little bit of encouragement. You don't want anything too sharp in there. I found that the chopstick was almost too blunt. I'm using my pencil without a lead in it, and just do it gently. Encourage the pieces one at a time. You don't want your thread to start pulling apart, so nothing too sharp in there, because you'll just possibly puncture holes. And these little toes, they just need a little bit of gentle encouragement. So I've just left a couple of toes here just to show you. There's one more toe to go, because it tends to want to bunch up in there a little bit. So just gently easing it out is how I found it. Just takes a little bit of time. He has to live with his toes, so I guess they need to be about right for him. So just this last toe being a little bit stubborn, but we're just about there now. There it comes. So that's looking pretty good. So we've got him all sitting quite nicely. I'm just going to give him a quick press, just to help. Just to help him sit quite nicely with those feet. I'm not really trying to sort of press them, but more just to make sure that the seams are sitting out reasonably, and so that he'll fill nicely. So the other thing is just to run it around the larger areas of seams, just to make sure everything is sitting out there quite nicely, ready to take the filling. And then I'm just going to start filling him now with the crushed walnut shell. So he takes a little bit of time to fill as well, because we've got to get it right into his toes. at some stage. The body part is kind of the easy bit, but we will have to ease it into his little feet. And the way to do that is just simply to have some fill in there, encourage it into his toes and things. It will move around a little bit and it will generally fill up a little bit more with a little bit of use, and possibly toss the toad or something like that. But we can just encourage some of it to go in there initially. That will be really helpful. So again, a little bit of time for the toad, and do the same on the other front leg, and then we can fill him up a little bit more and then try and get some into those back feet. So I'll go ahead and just keep doing that until I'm a little bit closer to full and show you again. So I haven't sewn him up yet, but I've been very busy filling him up. So he's looking pretty good. You want a little bit of room to move because you need him to be able to sit and to plonk quite nicely, and some of this filling will settle into the spaces once that's all done. In the meantime, we need to stitch up his little gap down the back end here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then all we need to do after that is just pop some eyes on. So I've used a couple of beads for the eyes. They could be buttons, and really we've done things like that before, so it's just sewing them through, but I'll come back and show you how I do that, so it won't be long. So I've sewn him up at the rear end there, so he's feeling a little contained now, and I've just sewn one of the beads on for the eyes there, and I've just got another little bead here. So what I found the easiest way to do this is to push some of the filling into his head when we're trying to position the second eye in particular. So I'm just going from that eye. I've sewn that one on, but I've gone from that one right through now to the other one, but I am just going to pull them in just a little bit so that there's a little bit of a dimple when the head's filled, and do an extra little stitch there just to hold that little pull, and then I can sew the other one on. It's a little bead. As I said, you could use buttons if you don't have beads, and just make sure that it's on fairly securely because he needs his eyes. And then we'll just, once I've got this on, we can secure the thread, and he is finished. So my toad now has a friend. They have two toads. Two toads living at Toad Hall. Okay, another one should just about do it, I think. I'm using double thread here in my needle. And I'll do a little tie-off stitch. Oops, bring it out somewhere inside there. And there is our next little toad. So here we have two little toads. They're both looking pretty happy. They love to have pins, as I said, stuck into them. They are just your pin's best friend. They'll sit there, they can have a little chat with you, they can have a little chat with each other when there's two of them. So that was the pincushion number 10 in our series of 20 pincushions. So thank you. I will see you again with pincushion number 11.